Can what we dig out of the ground serve to confirm that our gospel accounts are reliable? So a common attack on the Bible is that it's not a reliable book, that the Gospels in particular were written by men as legendary stories about this person, Jesus, that they wanted to promote to get this following. And critics of the Bible, liberal theologians, etc., will say that the Gospels are not reliable. Now, as Christians, we believe that the Bible and the Gospels that are in our scriptures are reliable. They're inspired by God and they're trustworthy. But is there a way for us to confirm this or verify this? Well, enter the field of archaeology. So archaeologists go out and they find and uncover and dig up various artifacts from different periods of history. Now, what can happen is sometimes the Bible authors will talk about something in their books. Maybe they're explicitly describing something, or maybe it's just an incidental detail. And archaeologists can actually find something in the ground, in the stones, that confirms what the biblical authors were talking about. And what this does is each new discovery acts as one little confirmation point to what the authors were writing about. So we can look at the reliability of the Gospels in a lot of different kinds of ways, but one is archaeology. And the more finds that we have from archaeology, the more we can verify or confirm that the Gospel authors knew what they were talking about. And time again, we find that the authors did indeed know their facts, and they do get the story right. And this is impressive. This shows that the authors were there, that they know about what they're writing about, and they are to be trusted. They are reliable. And many of these artifacts are things that are just incidental details in the gospel that end up being proved correct. So let's look at a few examples of these just to highlight some of the kinds of artifacts that have been found and how they confirm that the gospel accounts of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John are indeed reliable. So the first is the Pool of Siloam. So in the Gospel of John, in chapter 9, there's this blind man that approaches Jesus and he wants to be healed. And so Jesus takes the mud and puts it over the guy's eyes and tells him to go wash in the Pool of Siloam. And so for a long time, critics of the Bible assumed there was no pool really there, that this was just a made-up story. The early church, like in the 4th or 5th century, there was a church that was actually built at a site that they claimed was where that pool was, but no one had really found or discovered this pool in the location that would have been described in the Gospels. And likely it was one of these purification pools. Well, back in, I believe it was 2004, 2 archaeologists found the Pool of Siloam, and it was just as it would have been described in the scriptures, and its location matched up with where it should have been. It was actually really close to where that church was. And what this does is shows that John knew about the kinds of things that were there in the place that Jesus was doing his healing, and what was found in the ground by the archaeologists matched up with what John was talking about. And that pool that he claimed was there was in fact there in the ground, buried under the rubble. So one of the things that the gospel authors claim is that Jesus was raised from the dead. And something else that's interesting in the Gospel of Matthew is Matthew talks about this rumor that was going around that people were claiming that the disciples stole the body of Jesus. But we have no way of knowing whether or not that was actually a rumor that was going around. Well, in 1878, there was an inscription that was discovered by an archaeologist. He came across this, or some antiques collector came across this. And it was likely from the town of Nazareth, and it was dated to the 1st century. It actually went to like somewhere around 8040, something like that. And what this inscription found on it was an edict from the ruler in the area that barred or made it illegal for anyone to take a body from a grave to move it somewhere else. And again, this was right in the location where Jesus would have been buried. And this inscription seems to be some sort of law that was put in place in order to stamp out this sort of thing that the disciples were claiming had happened, that the body of Jesus had been raised from the dead. But the rumor was that people were stealing it. And so because the Roman rulers assumed that Jesus didn't actually raise from the dead, they assumed there was some body stealing that had happened. this Nazareth inscription seems to validate this rumor that Matthew talks about in his gospel, and just is another small confirmation that the little details that we find in the gospel accounts seem to be corroborated with each archaeological find that we uncover. Okay, this one's related to Herod's temple. So when they began doing excavations of the ruins of the Herodian temple in and around Jerusalem, there was an inscription discovered, a Greek, it was written in Greek, and it was an inscription that talked about someone who had made a donation to help construct the temple. And it talked about that this was done, this donation was made, and this was done at the beginning of the building of the temple. And it was done in the 20th year of the reign of Herod. And so we know that would have been in 20 BC. Okay, so the temple started, based on this inscription, we see that the temple would have began construction around 20 BC. Now, in John's Gospel, in chapter 2, when he's going through the temple and he's turning over the tables and he's having this interaction with the money changers, one of the Jewish leaders talks about how the temple had been under construction for 46 years, which would have placed this about the 26th year, or in AD 26, which if using other dating methods, this would have been right about the time smack dab in the middle of Jesus' ministry. So the stone carving that we find at the beginning of the building of the temple that sort of dates the beginning of the construction of the temple, and the dating that those money changers give that we find in John's Gospel matches up with the timeline not only of the building of the temple, but also of Jesus' ministry and when that sort of thing happened. So we have these dates being confirmed outside of the scriptures, matching up with the ministry of Jesus and some of the conversations that we find in Jesus' life. And these are just really small details, and on their own, they don't do a lot, right? On their own, they don't show that Christianity is true or that the Gospels are all the way true. But here's what they do show. They show that when the Gospel authors speak on something and we find something outside the Bible, an archaeological find that touches on those things they speak on, we find time and time again that the gospel authors get it right. They get their facts right, they get their details, their history, their politics, their geography right. They get the little things right. And when we can trust them in the little things as they begin to share their story, it gives us great confidence in trusting them in the other things that they share. And for this reason, among many others, we have confidence that we can trust our Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John.